So now we'll start with another chapter for the NSEJS, that is the tissue. It is the third chapter in biology that we are starting, and if we start with the introduction of this chapter, firstly we all know that, or it is a common fact, that all living organisms are made up of cells. We have already discussed in the first chapter that cell is the basic structural and functional unit of all living organisms. These cells, for example, perform different functions in the body and finally keep a living organisms alive. Apart from this, we have also discussed about the unicellular organism and multicellular organism. In unicellular organism, we were saying that a single cell is capable of performing all the functions required by the organisms to be performed. Whereas we were saying in multicellular organism, these cells, they form clusters or group, and then finally they become specialized to perform some specific function. Thus we are saying that in single cell, for example amoeba, a single cell is able to perform the process like digestion, ingestions, excretion, respiration and reproduction. Similarly, it was about the unicellular or all the unicellular organisms. But when we talk about the multicellular organism, we are saying that the group of cells, they are being specialized. There is a division of work or division of labor in which these cells, they are being divided with some specific work. And finally, these group of cells, they perform that specific work or specific function in the body of a living organism. So this was about the introduction, in which we are saying that in unicellular organism, a single cell will perform all the function. But when we move on to the more complex organism, or when we move on to the multicellular organism, we are saying a particular term or a particular word, that is division of labor. Division of labor simply means that the work has been divided to the group of cells, or finally these group of cells, they get specialized to perform that specific function in the body. So there are different functions which have to be performed by the body, and these different functions, they are being divided according to the specializations of the cell. So we are saying that these group of cells finally perform the specific function, and we constitute a term here, that is a tissue. So here we have written a definition of the tissue, in which we are simply saying that a group of similar or dissimilar cells which have a common origin or which should have a common origin, and these get specialized to perform a specific common function in the body. So in short, a group of cells which show a division of labor and get specialized to perform a specific or a common function in the body, this is known as a tissue. So this was about the introduction of the tissue. Now firstly we'll talk about the histology. So we have already talked about logy. Logy means the study of a particular thing. In cell and cell division, we have talked about cytology, that is the branch of biology which deals with the study of the cell and the different structure and functions of it. But here when we talk about the study of tissue, we gave it a particular term, that is histology. So histology is that sub-branch of biology which deals with the overall study of the tissues and the types and the functions of it. The term tissue was first of all coined by a scientist, that is Bichat. So Bichat was a scientist who gave this term or introduced this term tissue, and we are simply saying that the study of the tissue is known as histology. So we have talked about the tissues, what is a tissue, and now we'll move on to the importance of tissue. Importance, that is why a multicellular organism need this arrangement or need this organization. Why the body of a multicellular organism cannot be satisfied or will not be sufficient with the help of only the cells. Why they have to get more organized, there should be division of labor to form a particular tissue. So for this we'll talk about the importance of tissue. Generally we were saying that in multicellular organism there are wide variety of functions which need to be performed, and these wide variety of functions cannot be alone performed by a cell. So cell, that is the workload on a particular cell was more. So to get more efficient system, to get more efficient working of the body, these cells, they got organized. They got organized to perform some specialized function, and then they finally became the tissue. So we are saying that the importance of tissue firstly will be, that is the workload of a cell has reduced to a level. Then we are saying that they get organized into organ and organ system. We have already studied about the hierarchical classification, in which we were saying how a cell, it got organized into tissue. Then these tissue, they will group together and perform a function by forming an organ. Then these organs will arrange and form a system, that is an organ system. Then finally complete organism. So finally we are saying that it is the tissues that get again organized into organ and organ system and thus will complete the body of a multicellular organism. Then we are saying division of labor in multicellular organism. It is because of these tissues that the cells in the tissue, they are being specialized, they have been divided with some specific work so that the body can work more effectively. Thus, because of this tissue system, we are saying that there is a division of labor which have been introduced in the multicellular organisms. At last, we are saying there is higher survival rate and improved body organization. Higher survival rate in multicellular organisms. We are saying that in unicellular organism, the whole workload of that body to be alive is on a particular single cell. But in multicellular organism, since we are saying that there is a division of labor, so there is a higher chances of survival and better survival as compared to the unicellular organism. And this higher survival is only and only because of the improved body organization into tissue, organ and organ system, and also due to the improved functioning of the body because of this division of labor and tissue. So this was about the importance of tissue. So we are talking about the differences between plant tissue and animal tissue. As we already know that majority of the plants, they do not move from one place to another except for some aquatic plants. So we are saying that since they do not move from one place to another, so they need some kind of a support. And this support is being provided by the dead and supportive tissue because they have to be protected from the enemy which can harm the plant, as they cannot run away from one place to another like animals. So here we are saying that since plants, they do not show any kind of locomotion, they need some kind of a dead and more supportive tissue as compared to animals, because animals, they can move from one place to another. So their energy requirements are comparatively more high as compared to plants, and thus the animal tissue is made up of majority of the living cells, or we are saying it is made up of the living cells. So here simply we are saying that because of this major difference, the tissues of the plant and that of animals are completely different from one another, be it in structure or be it in function. So here we'll discuss some of the differences between a plant tissue and an animal tissue. So as you can see here, the plant tissue, these are generally dead and supportive tissue because we have already discussed they cannot move from one place to another. So they need a particular more kind of protection as compared to animals. Here we are saying in animals, the tissue that it contains mainly of living cells, so it is a living tissue because energy requirements are more, because they move from one place to another either in search of food or in search of the opposite sex or mate or shelter. Then we are saying that plant tissue, they need less energy. We have already discussed the same reason, because they are found at a particular place, they are not moving from one place to another, whereas the animal tissues or the animals, they need more amount of energy. Another difference is some of the tissues are dead and thick-walled in case of the plants for more support and for more protection. But here in animal tissue, we are discussing the difference, that is, these are made up of only living cells. Then we are saying that there is indefinite growth in plants. In plants, there are some specialized, localized region where the growth is being fixed. So we are saying that there is not any proper, uniform or continuous growth. There is an indefinite growth which occurs in plant. But when we move on to the animals, we are saying that the growth is uniform throughout the body of an organism. There are no any such kind of localized region where the growth will be more and some other region where the growth will be less. So simply we are saying that in animals, there is a definite growth and definitely there is a uniform growth in the body of an organism. Then at last we are giving some of the examples that we'll discuss now later on, in which we are giving that some of the examples of plant tissue are like xylem, phloem, cork, parenchyma and sclerenchyma, which we'll divide it into further groups. But here in animals we are giving the example as muscular tissue, we are giving the example as nervous tissue, connective tissue and so on. So this was the major difference between the plant tissue and animal tissue. So now we'll talk about the classification of the plant tissues, then we'll discuss about the classification of animal tissues. So firstly, when we classify the plant tissue, we divide it into two major groups. One is the meristematic tissue and other is the permanent tissue. Here we are discussing firstly about the meristematic tissue, in which we are saying that the type of tissue in which the cells are continuously dividing. And now we'll discuss it later on, what is the basic function, why these cells are continuously dividing in nature. And the permanent tissue, as the name suggests, those types of the tissue in which the cells, they have attained a permanent shape, permanent structure and a permanent function, and these are being derived from the meristematic tissue. So here we are dividing it into two major groups. One is the meristematic tissue and the other one is the permanent tissue. In meristematic tissue, we have divided it into three further subgroups. One is the apical meristematic tissue, intercalary meristematic tissue and lateral meristematic tissue. So this was about the meristematic tissue of the plant. When we move on to the permanent tissue, in permanent tissue we are saying that we have divided it into two further subgroups. One is the simple permanent tissue and other is the complex permanent tissue. Simple permanent tissue which consists of same types of cells and they perform a simple common function, and this have been further subdivided into three groups, that is the parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. In sclerenchyma we will see again two types of cell, one is the fibers, another is the sclerites. Then we move on to the complex permanent tissue, in which we are saying these are made up of different types of cells and they perform some specific complex function in the plant body. So these complex permanent tissue are further divided into two groups, that is we have divided it into xylem which carries water and minerals for the plant and phloem which carries food for the plant. In xylem we will study about the different elements or constituents, that is tracheids, vessels, xylem parenchyma and xylem fiber or xylem sclerenchyma. When we move on to the phloem, we are saying the two components are same and these two components are phloem parenchyma and phloem sclerenchyma, but the two components are different, that is sieve tubes and companion cells. So this was about the major classification or the hierarchical chart, in which now we will study in detail, that is what are the meristematic tissues, how they have been further subdivided, and similarly what are permanent tissue and what are their functions as well as the structure. So now firstly we will talk about the meristematic tissue in the classification of plant tissues. Meristematic tissue, these are highly characterized by only a single feature, that is continuously dividing cells. We also call it as meristems. So continuously dividing cells of the tissue which are required for the continuous growth of the plant at some specific location, at some definite specialized location, and these are found at that location and lead to the growth of the plant, like the stem tips and the root tips where the growth is being continuously required. So we are saying that these are continuously dividing cells of the tissue, highly active metabolic state of the cells of this tissue. Then when we talk about the characteristics of this tissue, we generally say that the cell cycle is continuously being switched on. That is cell cycle in which we have studied, we start with the G1 phase, then S phase, then G2 phase and M phase. Then followed by cytokinesis and again then we are saying G1 phase. So cell cycle, it is being continuously switched on. They are highly metabolically active state of the cell because they have to continuously divide. Then secondly we are saying that cells are similar in structure. When we have observed the cells of the meristematic tissue, we are generally saying that the cells of this tissue are almost similar in structure. And then we are saying the cell wall is thin and is made up of cellulose. When we talk about the plant cells, we generally say that the cell wall is made up of cellulose, and the meristematic tissue cells, they have the cell wall which is highly thin, and it is thin only because these cells are continuously being formed and they have not much time to form further divisions in the cell wall, that is to form secondary cell wall, tertiary cell wall and so on. So since these are newly formed cells, continuously dividing cells, so their cell wall is thin in nature. Then we are saying shape, many types of shapes of the meristematic tissue can be found, that is the cells of this tissue may be round, oval, rectangular or polygonal in shape. Then we are saying the intracellular spaces are absent. These are highly compact tissue. Highly compact tissue, that means that the cells are tightly attached to one another. There is no any such kind of minute space in these cells, and thus we are saying that the intracellular space, the space between the two cells, is absent in them. Then we are saying vacuoles, these are absent. Generally when we have discussed about the function of vacuoles, we were saying that vacuole, they are used for storing some material, for example the food material. But we are saying that since these cells are continuously dividing cells, so when these are continuously dividing cells, they don't have much time to store food or any kind of waste material in it. And since these are not having any time to store these kind of material, therefore we are saying that yes, generally the vacuoles are absent in the cells of the meristematic tissue. Then we are saying cytoplasm, it is densely packed. Again we will say that the cytoplasm, it is being newly formed in the newly dividing forming cells, so it is densely packed in the cells. And we also say that the nucleus, it is highly prominent in the cells of the meristematic tissue because these are continuously dividing cells. And since these are continuously dividing cells, the nucleus should be in highly active metabolic state, so that the cell they are being formed, they will again divide, then again they will divide, so the cycle goes on, that is cell cycle is continuously switched on. So this was about the whole characteristics of the meristematic tissue. Now we'll discuss the types of meristematic tissue. So now we'll classify the meristematic tissue into two different groups. The first classification is on the basis of the origin, that is how these meristematic tissue have been originated or from which cells they have been originated. So first classification is on the basis of origin, in which we have classified it into two groups. First is the primary meristem, and it is also known as the promeristem. And other is the secondary meristem, in which we are simply saying that primary means firstly formed. So these type of meristematic tissue, that is the primary meristem cells, they have been derived from the embryo meristematic tissue. So they have simply been derived from the embryo meristem, the firstly formed meristematic tissue, and they finally add on to the primary growth of the plant. Primary growth of the plant, that is in which we are saying that from the seedling a new plant grows, that is the shoot will grow, the root will grow, so this will be the primary growth of the plant. But when we talk about the secondary growth of the plant, we generally say that we increase the diameter or we increase the girth of the plant, that will be counted as the secondary growth of the plant. So here we are simply saying that primary growth, in which we are saying that it will be performed by the primary meristematic tissue that have been directly derived from the embryo of the plant. When we talk about the secondary meristematic tissue, we are saying that these type of tissue contain cells that have been derived from the permanent tissue. Now how come it is the permanent tissue? We generally talk about a process that is known as the differentiation. The meristematic tissue, they get differentiated to perform a basic function, and these differentiated cells ultimately form a tissue that is permanent tissue. But sometimes these permanent tissue again they get differentiated and they get the power to divide. So when they get this power to divide, they will form another kind of meristematic tissue, that is the secondary meristematic tissue. So simply we are trying to say in a simple language, that is from embryo, the newly formed tissue, that is the primary meristematic tissue. When these primary meristematic tissue, they lost the capacity to divide, they become differentiated, they form permanent tissue. But few of the permanent tissue again gain that power to divide, and then they become secondary meristematic tissue. So here we are talking about the secondary meristematic tissue that is being formed by the primary permanent tissue. Cells are derived from the primary permanent tissue, and ultimately they add on to the diameter or they add on to the girth of the plant, thus leading to the secondary growth in the plant. So we were talking about the processes of differentiations and de-differentiation. So here we'll talk about the whole process. In first state, we are saying that the meristematic tissue, they have the capacity to divide. But sometimes when they lose this capacity to divide, they become permanent by the process that is differentiation. In short, they become differentiated to perform some specialized function, and these type of permanent tissue that are being formed are known as the primary permanent tissues. Now some of the primary permanent tissue have cells that again regain the capacity to divide. So when these cells again gain the capacity to divide, they form another type of meristematic tissue, that is the secondary meristematic tissue, and the process by which they form this secondary meristematic tissue is known as de-differentiation. From differentiation, we are coming up to de-differentiation. But when again we are saying the secondary meristematic tissue, these cells, they lost the capacity to divide, and finally now they become permanent, now they will never divide further in the life of a plant, then they will be known as the permanent tissue, and the process that is being done here is the re-differentiation. So here we are talking about three types of differentiation. One is the normal differentiation process, in which from meristematic tissue we are forming permanent tissue. Then some of the cells of permanent tissue again gain the power to divide, and by the process of de-differentiation they form secondary meristem, which will increase the diameter or the girth of the plant. And then again these secondary meristematic tissue, they become re-differentiated, they again lose the capacity to divide and become finally the permanent tissues found in the plant.